Technical Sergeant Elena Vasquez wiped sweat from her brow as she hunched over the malfunctioning radio system in the communications center of Fort Carson. 6 months into her reassignment to the 4th Infantry Division, and she was still treated like an outsider by most of the men in her unit. "Hey, radio girl, you about done with that? We've got actual important messages to send," called Sergeant Miller, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. His smirk said everything his words didn't, that he considered her presence a nuisance at best, a liability at worst. "Almost finished, Sergeant," Elena replied evenly, not looking up from her work. Her fingers moved deftly across the internal components of the Insignia radio set, identifying the problem with practiced ease. "The frequency modulator is misaligned. Give me 5 more minutes." "Women and technology," Miller muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "Like mixing oil and water." Elena bit her tongue, a skill she'd perfected over 15 years of military service. At 35, she'd heard every dismissive comment imaginable. Before her transfer to Fort Carson, she'd served in positions that would make Miller's eyes bulge, but her previous assignment was classified, and the transfer hadn't been her choice. She finished the repair, the radio springing to life with crystal clarity. "All set," she said, closing the access panel and gathering her tools. The specialized set hung from a worn leather belt around her waist, each implement precisely where she needed it. "Took long enough," Miller said, sliding into the chair she vacated. He reached for the handset, then paused. "What's with the fancy belt anyway, trying to look like a real technician?" Elena's hand instinctively covered the small metal insignia riveted to her tool belt, a lightning bolt crossed with a key, encircled by stars. Most people assumed it was just a decorative buckle. "Family heirloom," she lied easily, heading for the door. Her next job was in the command building, a simple radio that had gone silent in the operations room. Normally, she would have sent one of her junior technicians, but the work order specified that the base commander wanted the best. "Not that he knows I'm the best," she murmured to herself as she crossed the sun-baked parade ground. Colonel James Richardson had barely acknowledged her existence since her arrival, despite her position as head of the technical support team. The operations center hummed with activity when she arrived. Officers moved between stations, reviewing maps and communications logs. In the center stood Colonel Richardson, his tall frame bent over a table covered with papers. "Sir, Technical Sergeant Vasquez reporting to fix the communications equipment," she announced, standing at attention. Richardson barely looked up. "Fine, just get it working before the general's call at 1500. "Yes, sir," Elena said, moving to the faulty unit in the corner. She knelt beside it, unclipping her tool belt and laying it beside her as she removed the access panel. The problem was immediately apparent. Someone had tried to modify the unit without proper training, crossing wires and damaging connection points. It would take delicate work to repair without replacing major components. "What's the status, Sergeant?" Richardson's voice came from directly behind her 20 minutes later. "Someone attempted unauthorized modifications, sir," Elena explained, pointing to the damaged sections. "I'm bypassing the damaged areas and restoring basic functionality, but it will need replacement parts for full capability." "Will it handle the call with General Haynes?" "Yes, sir. I've prioritized voice communications." Richardson nodded, seemingly satisfied with her competence for the first time. As he started to turn away, his gaze fell on her tool belt lying nearby. He froze, his eyes fixed on the small metal insignia. "Sergeant," he said, his voice suddenly different, "where did you get that insignia?" Elena met his eyes calmly. "I earned it, sir." The colonel's face paled slightly. He straightened to his full height and took a step back. "Finish the job, Sergeant, then report to my office immediately." He turned sharply and walked away, leaving conversations trailing off in his wake as others noticed his changed demeanor. Elena returned to her work, aware of the curious glances now directed her way. The insignia that had been her secret for so long was about to change everything, again. Part 2, the insignia. Colonel Richardson's office was meticulously organized, military awards and photos of deployment locations carefully arranged on the walls. Elena stood at attention before his desk, her posture perfect after years of practice. "At ease, Sergeant," Richardson said, studying her with new intensity. "That insignia on your tool belt, it's authentic." Yes, sir, Elena replied. I've only seen it twice before, the colonel said, leaning back in his chair. Once on a communications specialist attached to a Delta Force operation in Kandahar. The other time was in a classified briefing about a unit so secret that most of the Joint Chiefs don't know it exists. He paused. Signal Intelligence Special Operations Group, the Ghosts. Elena remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Your file says you were transferred here from a communications unit at Fort Bragg. Standard career progression. Richardson picked up a folder from his desk. But there's a 3-year gap with only the vaguest descriptions of your duties. That's not standard at all. My records are accurate as permitted by classification levels, sir, Elena said carefully. Richardson studied her face. Why is someone with ghost qualifications fixing radios at an infantry base in Colorado? The question hung in the air. Elena had asked herself the same thing countless times over the past 6 months. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. I made an enemy of the wrong person, Colonel. A general's son who couldn't accept that his operation failed because he ignored my intelligence assessment. People died. He survived and made sure I was reassigned somewhere my skills wouldn't threaten him again. Richardson's eyebrows rose. You're talking about Operation Copper Bell, the failed extraction in Yemen last year. Elena kept her expression neutral, but her surprise must have shown in her eyes. I had friends in that operation, Richardson continued. The official report blamed equipment failure and faulty intelligence. The intelligence was solid, sir. The equipment worked perfectly. What failed was leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Mercer, Richardson said, the name sounding like something distasteful. His father is General Mercer, Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command. Yes, sir, Elena confirmed. After I filed my after-action report documenting his decision to ignore warnings about the ambush site, I was transferred within 2 weeks. My security clearance was downgraded, and my specialized role was terminated. Richardson's jaw tightened. 3 good men died in that operation. 5, sir, Elena corrected quietly. 2 of my signal team were providing on-site support. Their names didn't make the official casualty list because technically they were never there. The colonel stood and walked to the window, looking out over the base. Captain Rivera was my friend since West Point, he said after a long silence. His wife still doesn't know exactly how he died because the mission was classified. Elena felt the familiar weight of grief and anger settling in her chest. I know, sir. I was on comms with him when it happened. I heard everything. Richardson turned back to her. And you've been fixing broken radios and enduring the casual sexism of men like Sergeant Miller ever since. Following orders, sir, doing my duty. Well, Technical Sergeant Vasquez, your duty is about to change. Richardson returned to his desk and pressed a button on his phone. Major Lane, come to my office immediately. While they waited, Richardson explained. Fort Carson is hosting a joint training exercise next week. Special Operations Command will be sending observers, including General Mercer and his son, who has since been promoted to full colonel despite the Yemen incident. Elena's stomach tightened. I understand, sir. I'll make myself scarce during their visit. No, Sergeant, Richardson said as a knock sounded at the door. You're going to be front and center. Major Lane entered, a tall woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes. You needed me, Colonel. Major Lane, meet Technical Sergeant Vasquez. She'll be joining your communications security team effective immediately. Her true qualifications have been understated. Major Lane looked at Elena with new interest. The woman who's been fixing our outdated equipment and making it work better than when it was new. The very same, Richardson confirmed, and she has specific knowledge that will be valuable for the upcoming exercise. He nodded to Elena. Show her. Reluctantly, Elena unclipped her tool belt and held it so the major could see the insignia. Lane's eyes widened. A ghost here, she looked at Richardson. Sir, with respect, what is Special Intelligence doing at Fort Carson? Being wasted, Richardson replied bluntly, until now. Part 3, the exercise. News spread quickly that Elena had been reassigned to the communications security team under Major Lane. The transfer raised eyebrows, particularly among those who had dismissed her capabilities. Sleeping your way up the chain of command, Sergeant Miller sneered when he encountered her in the mess hall the next day. Alina set down her tray across from him, something she'd never done before. Interesting theory, Sergeant. Does that approach work for you? The men at the table fell silent, unused to her fighting back. You think you're special because the colonel pulled you upstairs, Miller continued, refusing to back down. You'll wash out in a week. Perhaps, Alina said calmly, or perhaps there's more to me than you've bothered to notice. She stood, leaving her food untouched. Enjoy your lunch, gentlemen. Major Lane proved to be everything Alina's previous supervisors weren't: observant, respectful, and keenly intelligent. After reviewing Alina's actual qualifications, she put her in charge of security protocols for the entire exercise. These communication networks are vulnerable, Alina explained during their planning session 3 days before the exercise was to begin. The current encryption wouldn't withstand a determined attempt to intercept messages. Can you fix it? Lane asked. I already have, Alina replied, pulling out a flash drive. This contains a modified encryption algorithm I developed with my team in the Ghosts. It's not classified itself, though how we used it was. It will secure our networks against any potential intrusion. Lane raised an eyebrow. Any potential intrusion, like someone trying to make the exercise fail to embarrass Colonel Richardson. Exactly like that, ma'am, Alina confirmed. Colonel Mercer has a history of sabotaging operations to make himself look better by comparison. The preparations intensified as the date approached. Alina worked 18-hour days, personally checking every communication node and training the regular staff on security measures. Word of her expertise spread, and the snide comments gradually faded, replaced by grudging respect. The night before the exercise, Colonel Richardson called her to his office again. General Mercer and his entourage arrive tomorrow at 800, he said. I wanted to warn you personally. Thank you, sir, but I'm prepared. Richardson nodded. I've been making some calls, Sergeant, discreet inquiries about Operation Copper Bell. What you told me checks out with sources I trust. Alina felt a surge of vindication. The after-action report in the official record isn't accurate, sir. So I've gathered. The question is, what do we do about it? With respect, sir, we do our jobs, run the exercise flawlessly. Let the results speak for themselves. Richardson smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Exactly what Major Lane said you'd suggest. He stood. Get some rest, Sergeant. Tomorrow will be challenging. The exercise began at 900 the next morning, with visiting officers and observers gathered in the command center. Alina stood at the communications station, monitoring network activity, when a familiar voice made her blood run cold. Antiquated setup you have here, Richardson. Special Operations Command uses much more advanced systems now. Colonel Andrew Mercer had arrived, followed by his father, General Mercer. Both men exuded arrogance as they surveyed the room. We make do with what the budget allows, Richardson replied diplomatically. Fortunately, we have excellent technical staff. Mercer's eyes scanned the room, landing on Alina. For a moment, there was no recognition in his gaze, just the dismissive glance he might give any enlisted person. Then his expression changed as memory clicked into place. You, he said, his voice hardening. Technical Sergeant Vasquez, I'm surprised to find you here. Sir, Alina acknowledged with a proper salute, her face professionally blank. General Mercer glanced between them. You know this NCO, Andrew. She was attached to one of my operations last year, Mercer said vaguely. A minor support role. Alina kept her eyes forward, not trusting herself to speak. The families of 5 dead men deserved better than minor support role. Sergeant Vasquez is our communications security chief for this exercise, Richardson said smoothly. She's implemented some impressive protocols. Has she? Colonel Mercer's tone dripped with condescension. Well, we'll see how they hold up under pressure. As the exercise commenced, Alina monitored communications with intense focus. The scenario involved coordinating infantry movements with air support against a simulated hostile force. Everything ran smoothly for the first hour. Then she caught it, an unauthorized access attempt on the secondary command channel. Someone was trying to inject false information into the communications network, exactly as she had expected. Major Lane, she said quietly, we have an intrusion attempt on Channel Bravo. Lane moved to her station. Can you block it? Already done. The encryption is holding. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. I'm backtracing the source. Is it part of the exercise? No, ma'am, this is outside parameters. Elena looked up. It's coming from a device within this room. Part 4, the confrontation. Major Lane immediately reported the breach attempt to Colonel Richardson, who ordered a communications security lockdown, standard procedure for suspected compromise. All transmissions temporarily ceased, while Elena ran a full system diagnostic. What's the meaning of this interruption? General Mercer demanded as the exercise ground to a halt. Security Protocol General, Richardson explained calmly. We've detected an unauthorized intrusion attempt. Colonel Mercer scoffed. More likely operator error, your systems are outdated. The intrusion was sophisticated, sir, Elena reported, standing. But our encryption held. I've isolated the source to a device in this room. All eyes turned to her. The command center had fallen silent. That's a serious accusation, Sergeant, General Mercer said, his voice dangerously quiet. It's not an accusation, sir. It's a fact. Elena held up her tablet, displaying a signal trace. The attempt originated from a device using this unique identifier, military-grade equipment but not part of our network. Colonel Mercer's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. Richardson, control your NCO. Sergeant Vasquez is the most qualified person in this room to make that assessment, Richardson replied. I trust her judgment completely. The tension in the room thickened as Elena activated a signal detector and moved methodically around the room. The detector's soft beeping increased as she approached the visitor section, growing louder with each step toward Colonel Mercer. Step back, Sergeant, Mercer warned. You're out of line. Elena stopped directly in front of him. Sir, the device is on your person. This is insubordination, General Mercer thundered. Colonel Richardson, I want this woman removed immediately. Richardson didn't move. Sergeant, are you certain? Yes, sir, 100%. Elena held the detector steady, its signal unmistakable. Empty your pockets, Colonel Mercer, Richardson ordered. I will do no such thing, Mercer sputtered. Father, this is obviously a setup. Andrew, the general said quietly, empty your pockets. For a moment, it seemed Mercer might refuse even his father's order. Then, slowly, he reached into his jacket and removed a small black device. This is standard communications equipment, he insisted. I bring it to all exercises. Elena took the device with gloved hands. This is a signal interceptor and injector, sir, not standard issue for any branch of service. It's designed to break encryption and insert false commands. She connected it to her tablet, displaying the screen for all to see. Here are the prepared messages. It was attempting to inject false coordinates that would have sent our units into simulated enemy fire. The room erupted in murmurs as officers crowded forward to see the evidence. This would have made our forces look incompetent, Major Lane said, examining the data. Just like what happened in Yemen, Elena added quietly, looking directly at Colonel Mercer. When you ignored intelligence warnings and led your men into an ambush, when you needed someone to blame for your failure. You have no idea what you're talking about, Mercer hissed, but his face had gone pale. I was on comms that night, Elena continued, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. I heard Captain Rivera warn you about the enemy positions. I heard you dismiss him. I heard the ambush that killed 5 good men. General Mercer's expression had transformed from anger to shock as he looked between his son and Elena. Is this true, Andrew? He asked. Did you falsify the report about Operation Copper Bell? She's lying, Colonel Mercer insisted. She's bitter because I had her transferred after she couldn't maintain proper communications during a critical mission. Elena unclipped her tool belt and held it so the insignia was clearly visible. I was ghost communications, sir. We don't fail at maintaining contact. The only failure that night was leadership. General Mercer stared at the insignia, recognition dawning in his eyes. You're from the Signal Intelligence Special Operations Group. He turned to his son. Andrew, what have you done? Part 5, the vindication. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of debriefings and official statements. Elena recounted every detail of Operation Copper Bell to a team of investigators sent from the Pentagon. her perfect recall of communications logs and timestamps providing irrefutable evidence. Colonel Mercer was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. General Mercer, ashen-faced and suddenly looking much older, recused himself from any involvement in the proceedings. When Alina finally returned to her quarters after nearly 30 hours without sleep, she found Major Lane waiting outside her door. "You did well, Sergeant," Lane said simply. "The families of those men deserved the truth." "Yes, ma'am, they did." Alina felt hollowed out, the vindication bringing less satisfaction than she had expected. 5 good men were still dead. "Get some rest," Lane advised. "Colonel Richardson wants to see you at 1400 hours." When Alina reported to Richardson's office, she found not only the colonel but also a tall woman in civilian clothes sitting across from his desk. "Sergeant Vasquez," Richardson said, "this is Ms. Carter from the Department of Defense. She'd like to speak with you." Ms. Carter stood, offering her hand. "Technical Sergeant Vasquez, your reputation precedes you." "Ma'am," Alina replied cautiously. "I represent a joint task force focused on communications intelligence," Carter explained. "We've been reviewing your file since yesterday's incident." Alina remained at parade rest, waiting. "The Ghost program was officially disbanded 6 months ago," Carter continued. "Budget cuts officially. Unofficially, there were concerns about certain operations, including Copper Bell." "I'm aware of the disbanding, ma'am. What you may not be aware of is that we're establishing a new unit with similar capabilities but broader oversight." Carter smiled slightly. "We need experienced personnel to lead it." Alina glanced at Colonel Richardson, who nodded encouragement. "You're offering me a position?" she asked. "We're offering you your own command, Sergeant, or rather Captain Vasquez, pending your acceptance and promotion." The words took a moment to register. "A commission." "You've earned it," Richardson said. "Your actions yesterday prevented what could have been a disaster for this base and potentially brought justice for 5 families who have been living with lies." Alina thought of her team from the Ghosts, the friendships forged in impossible situations, the 2 men who died in Yemen. "What about the others from my unit, the ones who were reassigned after the program ended?" "We're contacting all former Ghost personnel," Carter confirmed. "Those who wish to join the new unit will be welcome, security clearances fully restored." "And Colonel Mercer?" Alina had to ask. Richardson's expression hardened. "The investigation is ongoing, but the evidence is damning. He won't be in a position to harm anyone else's career." 3 weeks later, Alina stood in front of a formation at Fort Bragg, newly minted captain's bars on her shoulders. Before her stood 12 familiar faces, the surviving members of her Ghost team, reassembled and ready for their new mission. "Attention to orders," called the adjutant, reading Alina's promotion citation. The formal words washed over her as she thought about the journey that had brought her here. From being dismissed as just the woman who fixed radios to commanding an elite communications unit. From being silenced by Mercer's influence to having her record not only cleared, but celebrated. After the ceremony, as her team gathered around her with congratulations, a staff car pulled up. The driver opened the rear door, and a woman in her 50s emerged, her face lined with grief but her posture military straight. "Captain Vasquez," she asked, approaching Alina. "I'm Catherine Rivera, Captain Rivera's wife." Alina felt her throat tighten. "Ma'am, your husband was a fine officer and a good man." "They finally told me what really happened," Mrs. Rivera said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "After all this time, I know the truth about how he died." She reached out and took Alina's hand. "Thank you for not giving up, for making sure his sacrifice wasn't buried in lies." Alina glanced down at the insignia still attached to her tool belt, her personal reminder of promises kept and battles fought. She'd had offers of a new, more appropriate belt for her officer's uniform, but this one stayed with her. "It was my honor, ma'am," she said softly. Later that evening, as Alina packed the last of her belongings from Fort Carson, her phone buzzed with a message from Colonel Richardson. "Just heard from the Pentagon. Mercer has been formally charged with falsifying reports and endangering personnel. General Mercer has submitted his retirement papers. Justice moves slowly, Captain, but it moves. The tool belt insignia suits you better than anyone I've ever known. Carry it with pride." Alina ran her fingers over the lightning bolt, and key emblem one more time before carefully packing it away with her tools. The insignia that had once marked her as an outcast had become a symbol of vindication.